I'm David Kemp, Associate Director at Turner & Townsend. In a previous life, very heavily involved in local authority and social housing procurement. So a bit of a background and track record in this kind of space. But currently I'm the Programme Director for the Social Housing Retrofit Accelerator and the Home Upgrade Hub. So for some of you that might also be local authorities that have got Hub 2 cash, you will have touched the services that we're ultimately at Turner & Townsend responsible for. So you've done something wrong, obviously, because you've got 25 or 30 minutes of me. But then hopefully, if you're amenable to it, we can have a bit of a lively discussion around the issue of procurement and sustainable procurement in general. So yeah. On that basis, let's get cracking. So yeah, we know sustainability, it's a cross-cutting thing. It impacts all the different services that we as organisations provide and have. So we need to be mindful of sustainability when we are actually going to market for stuff. So, responsive repairs programs is a case in point. We need to integrate sustainability into these kind of activities just as much as, your strategy for asset management and resident engagement and things of that nature. It's really important that these things are, sustainability is baked in. So in terms of the agenda, yeah, there will be more than 4 slides. Apologies for that. But broadly speaking, these are the areas that we want to cover today. So, what is procurement for those that are completely and utterly new to this? What's sustainable procurement? How contractors, influence and impact sustainable procurement and particularly your objectives in the sustainability space? And then at the back end, what does good sustainable procurement actually deliver? So first off, what's procurement? 2 different definitions here. The first is the one used by the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. So your procurement teams, the people that manage procurement processes within your organisations, 9 times out of 10 they will be SIPS certified or qualified or in the process of. So this is the professional qualification around procurement. That's all SIPS, and there it says. Procurement is buying of goods and services that enable an organisation to operate in a profitable and ethical manner. Basically, you lot getting the stuff that you need to do what you do. That's procurement in its simplest form. In the public sector, and by that I'm also including social housing, registered providers as well as ALMOs and local authority on stock, there is another consideration, and that's called, I love this, MEET, the most economically advantageous tender. So MEET is something that you should be taking into account within your procurement decisions and your specifications and all that kind of stuff. And it's effectively a mixture of quality considerations as well as commercial considerations that relates to the thing or the service that you are buying. So yeah, other things that are important to you as an organisation could factor in most economically advantageous tendering scenarios, and that's something that you guys need to consider. So broadly speaking, as organisations that are bound by the Public Contract Regulations 2015, and I'll touch on that in a bit more in a second, there are broadly speaking 4 main types of procurement or routes to market for you, and these are all defined in the Public Contract Regulations. There are a couple of others, but they're proper niche, and I won't go into them in too much detail. Likewise, given timescales around things like social housing decarbonisation fund delivery and home upgrade grant cash too, the 2 that I put a big red cross on, they are equally a bit niche, a bit specialist, take a lot of time to come to fruition. So broadly speaking, for your retrofit programs and projects, your colleagues in procurement would probably advise you to progress down either an open procedure or a restricted procedure. Open procedures, again, there's no value threshold. It's effectively where you, as an organisation, advertise for what it is you want in an open and transparent fashion, and suppliers respond to your invitation to tender. You've got your predefined evaluation methodology, your quality questions, your commercial document, and all that kind of stuff. You assess it and you appoint. Restricted procedure is pretty much the same as the open procedure, except there are 2 stages to it. And you might have come across phrases like pre-qualification questionnaires or PQQs. That's effectively a mechanism or a means of filtering the number of organisations that you ultimately issue an invitation to tender to. So yeah, it's kind of like repeating yourself to an extent. But some organisations view that as a more robust way of getting a quality supplier. Others take a different view, and a well-developed open procedure can deliver just as robust a supplier and quality considered procurement process. So what is good procurement? What are the principles that sit behind it? Well, generally speaking, and I want to stress the generally for this first point, it's achieved through competition. And by that, we mean, you've got your requirement, I want 50 pencils, and you go out and get your 3 quotes from the pencil suppliers. So people are competing with each other for your particular requirement. And the theory there is that we can incentivize quality and drive down cost, because people want to work with you, so they'll pull out all the stops. There are some exceptions to that, and that's notionally around the use of framework agreements, which we're not going to go into in any significant detail on this in this particular presentation, although there is another SHRA and HUG masterclass on the subject of procuring retrofit, and we go into that in a bit more detail, so check that out on the website if you wish. There are instances where a framework you can directly award a contract, and that in some cases can prove better value for money for you. But generally speaking, you want your suppliers and contractors to compete with each other. Likewise, generally speaking, you want to procure in line with national or international agreed legislation and obligations. I think that's a bit of a given, really. However, again, for social housing providers and these other contracting authorities, so local authorities in particular, there are other things that we need to enshrine within our procurement processes. One is this value for money, or MEAT, the most economically advantageous tender. Equally, you need to be able to demonstrate proprietary and good practice. So, broadly speaking, this is, should the National Audit Office come back and inspect and interrogate your procurement process, there's nothing weird and dodgy lurking in there. You can stand up quite, proudly and say, we've appointed this contractor or this supplier on this basis. And it's not just because, they took the executive director to the golf course or things of that nature. We need to be able to demonstrate that we are spending public money in the way that the wider public would expect us to. And that's that point there. And lastly, we've got, I've already mentioned it, the Public Contract Regulations 2015, or the PCR. This is due to be replaced, but the procurement bill keeps getting kicked down the line a little bit. And the new procurement regulations will come in whenever that's finally agreed. But for the time being, the Public Contract Regulations, the PCR 2015, is the document that defines how we go to market. It shares what you can and cannot do in relation to procurement. So again, there might have been a really helpful contractor or supplier that's helped you model your stock or develop your program with you. You can't just give them the contract because they've been a good egg at the front end. That's outlined in the Public Contract Regulations. It's not the most interesting of reads by any stretch of the imagination, but it's good to get your heads around it, because if you're specifiers, that is, because when your procurement team start to highlight, well, we can't do this because the PCR says we can't, you know why, and ultimately you won't ask the thing that you can't do because of the regulations. So some of the skills for good procurement, well, everything's really important in relation to delivering a good procurement exercise in relation to what's written on this particular slide. All things equal, but some are more equal than others. And I've called out 2 specific things which often get lost or forgotten. The first is stakeholder management, and you'll hopefully understand why this is such an important skill to have as we progress in this presentation. But it's bringing together all the people that will be impacted on or have a stake, an interest in the procurement that you are making, and the suppliers or the contractors that you'll be appointing. So good stakeholder management, make sure you're getting it right at the front end of the procurement process, but equally it helps to manage conflict, confusion, dispute, all that kind of stuff throughout the procurement process, and then onto contract delivery. So stakeholder management is a really key one. And the other one that I've called out is contract management. And this is just like a personal bugbear more than anything else, but I've got the opportunity to highlight it here. We ask for so much good stuff within our procurement processes, key performance indicators around this, social value, objectives, and so on and so forth. And we get these wonderful responses from supply chain, and they say they're going to give us the earth, and then we don't actually check to see whether or not they've done it. And we just miss so much added value from a lack of contract management. So it's, if you're asking people to, consider the local economic growth and so on and so forth in the tender responses, make sure that they're doing it, please, else they just won't bother, because people, unfortunately, tend to be lazy. Okay, so what is sustainable procurement? Well, it's not a dark art. Ultimately, sustainable procurement is just good procurement. No one, with the exception perhaps of like Dr. Evil or some other evil organization, they don't go out with a procurement in mind to do harm. We're not gonna. We only want suppliers that are terrible for the environment or have slaves in their supply chain. Nobody does that. So, sustainable procurement is just good procurement that considers social, economic, and environmental factors. Going back to the earlier slide in the deck, most economically advantageous tender. These are, sustainable procurement should be baked into public procurement as it currently stands. So we want to consider wider things as well as just the supply of that pencil again. So in terms of environmental considerations, we're looking at reducing emissions from either the product that we're buying or the service that's being provided, or how that product is supplied. We might have a need for an environmentally unfriendly product for our manufacturing process, like a chemical for our processes or what have you. But if that can be procured in a way that the manufacturers are rewarded for making that nasty product in a way that's as beneficial to the environment as possible, or minimizes the impact of its production, that's a good example. That's a good thing to have. So it's reducing the nasty stuff, increasing efficiency of material use, energy efficiency, and equally this concept of circular economy, buying things that can be recycled or repurposed and reused and things like that. Equally social, we want a diverse supply chain base. We want fair employment practices. We don't want modern slavery in our workforce. We want all of this good stuff, fair trade and ethical sourcing. These are considerations within that social pillar. And lastly, when it comes to economic, well, obviously we got economics from our own perspective. Does it make financial sense to us as an organization? And we can't forget that. If we can't afford it, we can't afford it. So economic from our own perspective, but equally the wider potential for job creation in your local area, supporting social enterprises, small to medium enterprises, creating jobs and apprenticeships for, if you're a social housing provider, for example, tenants within your communities, and ultimately making sure everybody gets a decent crust at the back end of it. We're not in this game to screw people into the ground, and make contractors and suppliers go bust. So these are primary, I suppose, considerations. What might that look like in real life? Well, again, if you're procuring design type solutions, are those designs going to be cognizant of or incorporate things that we talked about there? Orientation of buildings in your building design to maximize solar gain, and minimize or reduce the amount of heating that you need. Likewise, passive solar shading to mitigate against summer overheating and the need for active cooling. So reflecting these considerations within any kind of designs that you're procuring. Equally, that production methods, the example I gave earlier, we might need to buy something that's not very nice, but that still can be made in a very environmentally friendly or a socially minded way. Equally, you can get a product that's brilliant for the environment, and there were some examples of this recently, concerns around solar PV, for example, that have got some nasty things lurking in the supply chain, slavery, illegal mining, and such like. Service delivery, again, looking at the environmental impacts of how your contractors are delivering stuff for you. You could be installing air source heat pumps, brilliant. They're environmentally friendly, they're energy efficient, they reduce fuel bills. But if the service to install them emits hideous amounts of carbon because, I don't know, the fleet that your contractor uses runs on coal or baby otters or whatever it is, that's not good. So we need to be reflecting service delivery, how your requirement is delivered. Use and maintenance, and this I suppose is the last one I want to focus on this before we go into too much, go off down a rabbit hole and a rant. We often see, certainly within the housing sector and equally the local authority space as well, silo mentality when it comes to budgets and such. What is a saving over here and what makes sense over here actually impacts on a different team within your organization. It might be cheap to buy, but it's hideously expensive to maintain or replace. Equally, as a social housing providers, we need to consider the end user in this particular instance. It looks great, it's super environmentally friendly, but no one figures out how to use it. It's too complicated, and therefore the benefits aren't realized. So all of these considerations need to be factored into your procurement strategy and your approach to developing your procurement. So why are contractors important to sustainable procurement? Well, just focusing on one particular sustainability related metric, and that's greenhouse gas emissions. Contractors are responsible for around about 25% of it. It's attributed to the built environment, it's attributed to the maintenance works that we deliver, the new build. We've got the embodied carbon kind of things. There's a whole host of stuff. If you look equally at your own organizational carbon footprints, I would bet my house on the fact that the majority of your carbon emission as an organization lurks within what's called scope 3, which is the products and services that you procure and or commission, and that would include the embodied carbon within the products you're buying and the carbon emitted from your contractors that are doing work on your properties. So yeah, there's a whole host of carbon lurking within there. And then if we take into account other things like waste, water pollution, air pollution, diesel vans chugging up and down your estates, pumping out fine particulate matter and contributing to asthma within your local areas. There's a whole host of stuff that lurks within our supply chains and which construction supply chains in particular contribute significantly to. So what do we do? We still need them. So we can't do what we do without construction contractors and construction projects and products. So ultimately, we need to start to work with our supply chains and our contractors to help them understand what is important to us as organizations. Equally, we've told them why it's important to us. We need to start to encourage them to begin or advance their own sustainability practices. And this is something that pops up from time to time, more so when I was involved in directly procuring projects for landlords. You might have a question in your tender pack that says, "Now tell us about all your sustainability stuff, Mr. or Mrs. Contractor," and they'd respond to say, "We install solar panels, we install this, we're dead good at these things." That's specification. That's your client's objective. What is it that you do about your own sustainability? And that's the message I think that we need to get across and work with our supply chains on. So yeah, the initial steps to engaging with our contractor. Well, the first one is open those communication channels and get onto them relatively early. This isn't about things that they have to do that will add necessarily cost or hassle. They might do both, but ultimately we need to be able to articulate the benefits to them from supporting you on your sustainability journey. Winning more work, becoming more efficient, having happier, healthier workforce, and so on and so forth. There's a whole host of benefits that contractors can realise from engaging meaningfully with your sustainability objectives, but also developing their own. Identify where you want to focus your activities. So your supply chains might be huge, and to use that old adage, how do you eat an elephant? Bit by bit and bite by bite. So, undertaking some sort of prioritization of your procurement activities, supply chains, to identify the areas that have the biggest impact on your sustainability objectives, but equally through the lens of how much you can influence. So, an example might be you need to buy products from a really, really, really massive global supply chain type organization, and you are but a teeny tiny drop in their order book. If you start demanding or requesting that these guys change everything that they do to suit your needs, well, to be frank, I don't think they'd listen. So, it's those aspects of your supply chain that impact on your sustainability goals and objectives, but equally that you have the ability to influence. And then equally, lastly, it's look at how you can work together to upskill your supply chain and encourage that learning and collaboration, whether it's between your supply chain partners themselves, or whether it's looking at training programs that you're putting your own internal teams on, carbon literacy or what have you, inviting supply chain along. It fosters that spirit of collaboration and partnership working. We all need to work together to get to net zero by 2050 or whatever that objective is. We all need to work together to deliver our sustainability outcomes. So why don't we, learn together? And equally, you've got the procurement process itself. So if you've seen any of the other procurement related masterclasses, we go into this in a significant amount of detail. But broadly speaking, the procurement process does support you to embed sustainability, using some key documents that you would issue as part of a tender pack. So the first one is the invitation to tender, which obviously needs to be quite clear, articulate your scope of services and works. But there you can see in bold what are the desired outcomes that you want to achieve from this procurement exercise. And they can relate back to your sustainability objectives and organisation. We don't just want PV installed. We want PV installed in a way that minimises carbon emissions, maximises local labour, all of that really good stuff that you want to see for your communities. Articulate what that is within your invitation to tender. Likewise, make sure that that's reflected within your evaluation criteria as well. So, say we want all of this kind of stuff, and then weighting price 90% and program management the remaining 10. Where does that leave sustainability? I'm not suggesting necessarily that we need specific, give us your environmental policy type questions or things of that nature, but we'll touch on that in quality questions in a second. But we need to be clear how and where sustainability features within our award and appointment methodology. Moving along to the quality question document. Again, generic questions generate generic answers. So what I'd suggest we explore here is forward-looking questions that test your supply chain on what they are going to do for you on this particular opportunity. Not what you've done in the past for another social housing provider. Tell me what you're going to do for me in relation to the thing that's really important to me, which is, I don't know, minimizing water pollution on our sites. So, forward-looking questions. We can, jumping around a little bit, use responses to forward-looking questions within our contract management framework. You said within your tender you were going to do this, and you articulated this wonderful journey about how you're going to stop all that nasty water pollution getting down the drains when you're doing the repointing and there's dust and stuff everywhere. We're going to monitor you on it. There you go. They can't turn around and say, well, we can't really do that, because they've told you what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. Equally within your quality questions, you can include your other priorities, so social value, sustainability, things of that nature. But we need to be clear, and this ties back to the evaluation criteria. We need to weight things sensibly. And lastly, we've got the spec doc. And this is possibly one of the most useful, actually, in relation to sustainability. Specifications aren't just for things. So it doesn't just have to be, I want 5 pencils that are yellow with graphite core and are made out of wood or whatever it is. You can specify other service requirements. You can specify behaviors. You can specify standards. So that pencil that's made out of wood, it must be FSC certified, and it must be delivered via, electric vehicles. You can go to town on this sort of stuff if you want to, but it isn't just about copper tube and widgets and grommets. Behaviors and other service requirements can equally be incorporated within that. is a risk associated with going berserk in the specification, though, and that's your supply chain can't actually deliver what you want them to deliver. There have been instances where really, really, really great sustainable specifications were issued for things like cleaning services, and none of the local cleaning contractors were able to access those particular products that were required or deliver the service in a particular fashion, and therefore it results in no tender returns. And that's why, looping back up, we have that stakeholder engagement and stakeholder management that's so important. Your supply chain is a stakeholder. Being able to engage with them before you go to market to articulate, this is what we want, this is what we're going to go to market for. Who can respond? It is a very good way of figuring out whether or not you're going to get any tender returns. So yeah, specification, use it, but don't abuse it. So in kind of summary, the sustainable procurement principles, yeah, big and bold. Remember, sustainable procurement is just good procurement. I don't think necessarily we need a sustainable procurement policy and a procurement policy. One should be embedded within the other. It's simple. If it's viewed as different, it's someone else's job and someone else's responsibility. It's not. It's all our responsibility and all of our jobs to get it right. So sort out your policy, your procurement policy. So take your time to develop one that works for you, your organization, your objectives, and then follow it through. Don't just cut and paste off the internet. There was some cracking examples in some tenders we were evaluating. It was for construction contractors, but the sustainable procurement policy talked about beef farming in the Amazon. It's like, where the hell did this come from? It's not relevant. It's not relevant to me as an organization. It's certainly not relevant to the supply chain, so they're not going to take it seriously. So develop one, take the time and effort to do it right. And then we've got engage. So that's engage everyone within your organization that has a vested interest in a procurement decision and or works with suppliers. So this is what we want to do. This is what we want to go on market for. Can your views feed into this? These are our budgets, all of that stuff to make sure that when we do go to market, it takes into account those wider sustainability considerations. You're not going to bankrupt the maintenance team, for example, but equally it is deliverable. Your supply chain can respond and provide you with the works and products and services that you require. Sustainable supply. Now, this is a slightly interesting one. And this goes back to that comment, I suppose, around asking your contractors in procurement exercises about their sustainability objectives. What you want are suppliers that respond and support your objectives, not their own. All right, it's great that this contractor is really keen on biodiversity or whatever it is, and they've got all these wonderful things in place to make their sites as biodiverse as possible, and the head office has got Swift boxes and there's a bee hive on the roof, and that's brilliant. But if your thing is water pollution again, that doesn't really help you, does it? So working with your supply chain, asking the questions of your supply chain to make sure that they reflect your objectives as well as their own. So it's not about binning off all those beehives. You're brilliant. You keep on that. What we want to do is work with you to make sure that water runoff from your sites is as clean. There's no spills and so on and so forth. The fact that they're doing good stuff elsewhere is brilliant, but what you really want are those organisations that will support you in your journey. Prioritize, we talked about that. So which bits of your supply chain matter the most, whether it's value, volume, reputational impact, environmental impact, societal impact, which bits do you want to focus on? We can't do all of it at once. It'd be crackers to try, we'd fail ultimately. So where can we as organizations make the most meaningful change in relation to the sustainability agenda and focus on that step by step, bite by bite? There goes that elephant. Encourage. So that's not only your internal colleagues, whether it's procurement staff, the specifiers, getting people upskilled in the wider sustainability agenda and what's important to you, but equally working with your suppliers, it can actually help support competition. So, for example, if you were an organisation that had a framework of suppliers, or you had a pool that you continually approach for quotes, and one is always better than the other because they're scoring really highly, on the the sustainability type considerations, they can get a little bit sloppy when it comes to commercials. We know we're going to win it because we're the only ones out of the four of us that are dead good on this. Yeah, let's work in a bit of fat now. If you're able to work with all of your supply chain to help bring those up to a similar level, that aren't performing as well to the same level as the organization that knows what they're doing in relation to sustainability, you've got competition back. But equally, you've got more contractors that understand this. So even if they're going for jobs and opportunities outside of your organization, they're doing it in a sustainable way. And it's a virtuous circle. You get a nice warm fuzzy feeling. You're helping others to help themselves. So there's an incentive for you from that, maintaining a competitive environment for products and services that you require, but also you're helping others do good things. And the last one is just lead. Get senior buy-in, get it down from the top, and then deliver. Do what you say you're going to do, because ultimately, if you're talking all this talk and then you don't follow it up with the walk, no one's going to listen. Everyone's going to realise that you're all mouth and no trousers, and that's there's not a lot of point. You won't get what you want. You won't deliver sustainable outcomes from the procurement exercises you're delivering. So we do all of that. What are the outputs? Well, ultimately, from a client perspective, obviously you're not breaking the law. You're following most economically advantageous tender, the concept of meet, which you're obliged to do. We're looking at things like total cost of acquisition. We know that, it might be cheap up front, but it hemorrhages cash during the maintenance. We've allowed for that. So actually, overall, this is the long-term, most financially viable solution for us, doing good stuff for the environment. Everyone's happy. The community loves it. Job done. You're a happy client. Within our supply chains, they understand what they need to do. They improve their own environmental performance for yourself and for others. And again, their teams, their staff become happier, healthier, more diverse. All of that. Again, there's a whole host of benefits for them by engaging with you, them being the contractor supply chain, from engaging with you on your sustainability journey. So they get good stuff out of it and all. And ultimately, throughout our supply chains, we get rid of all the nasty stuff that nobody ever wanted anyway. No child labour, bribery and corruption's gone, illegal timber. No, that's the thing of the past, because we put in place all of these processes and systems, and we're working with contractors that understand and want to work with us on this thing.